again, everybody. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Knights at the Roundball Table. I'm C-Red Fred. The purpose of this show is to bring some of the greatest minds of Bulls Nation together to talk about the pressing Bulls topics of the day. Tonight's guests are the great one, the Podfather, Doug Tonis of Bulls Beat, and the Big Red Bus.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to be on the second show and the first show.
It's the second one and the first one. You're a two-timer already.
Two-time guest already. Amazing.
You set a record. And hopefully it'll be a three-timer very soon. From New York, a reformed Knicks fan, now a Bulls fan, copious amounts of Bulls knowledge, 30-plus years of coaching experience. The wise coach, Coach Mike Colucci. How you doing there, Mike?
I'm doing great, Fred. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm anxious to listen to the opinions of my fellow Knights for the next 30 minutes.
Sounds great. From Australia, by the miracle of the internet, legendary reformed Dogabolian, occasional nemesis, more often than not, quasi-friend. From Bulls HQ, it's the Andy Gibb of Bulls Twitter. Mark K., how you doing, brother?
I have no idea who Andy Gibb is, so I'm assuming that's a slight of sorts. But I'm good, Frederick. I'm well. Happy New Year to everyone, and happy to be on.
Great. You got to be kidding me. You don't know who Andy Gibb is, the youngest brother of the famous Bee Gees, who was not in the Bee Gees? Well, let's get into Bulls topics. First of all, it's so great to have these three legends here and Mark together on one show. With that, I hereby call the Knights at a Roundball Table to order. The first topic.
Issue number 1, meeting expectations. The Bulls, with high expectations after a 3-1 preseason, have started the year at 2-4. They've been absolutely destroyed by Atlanta, Indiana, and Milwaukee, but scored 2 impressive wins over the Wizards on the road without the services of Lauri Markkanen and Tomas Satoransky. The Bulls could easily be 3-3, but a disappointing home loss to Golden State on a Damian Lee three-pointer ended any hopes for a 500 start.
I'll start out with you, the great one, Doug Tonis.
I would say it's probably a little bit below. It's not so awful. The main thing is we beat Washington twice. They're very bad, and maybe we didn't expect them to be really bad, but they are. And then we get annihilated by the two teams that I felt were average or above. So projecting out, I don't feel real confident about the team going forward, and I don't expect great things as we head into January and have this long road trip against just tough opponent after tough opponent. I think it's going to look really bad later. So 2-3, not so bad, but it's not looking as good as the record.
Let's go to you, Mark. What say you?
I would say below expectations at this point, just purely because the schedule through the first 6 games was probably the easiest part of the next sort of month of scheduled games. So at this point, the Bulls are bottom 10 in offense, bottom 5 in defense, if I'm not mistaken. They're definitely bottom 5 in net rating. Have a minus 9.9 net rating at this point through 6 games. Obviously, those numbers can be inflated by 1 or 2 games here and there. But at the same point, like as Doug alluded to, had we not played the Wizards, who were just looking god awful at this point, I don't know how bad this Bulls team would actually look. Maybe that win, or those couple wins against the Washington Wizards, has sort of inflated those numbers a little bit. How bad would it maybe have looked if they played a more competent team? So I'm probably a little disappointed at this point through 6 games. I was expecting a little bit more, but we'll obviously see how it sort of shakes up. But the schedule gets a lot harder from here on out.
Coach Colucci, what say you?
I'm going to make it 3 for 3, Fred. Slightly below expectations. I look at that Golden State game as one they should have won, but actually pointed out one of their real faults is that neither of their starting guards can play defense. I'm 63, and a couple of times I thought, Mike could do that, as they blew by for layups and penetration. So slightly below. But here's the thing. I want to see 18 games. Let's go a quarter into it, because a little later on you're going to ask about Billy Donovan, and I'm curious to see, is there improvement in 25% of the season? So slightly below, totally agree with Doug and Mark.
Yep, and that is correct answer. It is slightly below. The Bulls for 3 games have been so non-competitive. Is very disappointing to get blown out by the Bucks, to get blown out by Indiana, and get blown out by in the first game of the season against who was it they got blown out? Atlanta. But I thought in the other 3 games against Golden State and the 2 against the Wizards, they played above expectations. In fact, well above in that, especially that second game against Washington, or the first game against Washington. So overall, 3 really good games, 3 really bad games, still a little bit below expectations. That's the correct answer. Let's move on to the next topic.
Issue number 2, starting Gafford over Wendell Carter Jr. A recent NBC Sports Chicago poll found that 32% of the fan base felt Daniel Gafford should start over Wendell Carter Jr. After a strong effort versus Washington, the Start Gafford movement seems to be gaining momentum. As idiotic as it may seem to some, the pro-Daniel Gafford voices seem to be getting louder.
Can we call it a movement, or is it just several loud, opinionated people who maybe feel this is the right move? And I don't want to call it a movement because I don't want to give it too much traction, because I just think it's a crazy idea. I don't know why people are jumping on this idea at this point. I understand Wendell Carter hasn't necessarily come out and lit the world on fire through the first 6 games of the season. Even the first 4 preseason games, he wasn't that great either. So, out of the 10 games he's played in this season, he's maybe played 2, 3, maybe 4 good games, let's say. So I understand why some people are concerned about Wendell Carter, but at this point to suggest that Daniel Gafford, who should just leapfrog him in the rotation and should jump up into the starting center position, given that Daniel Gafford has been probably even worse than Wendell Carter, who maybe beyond that one amazing half that he had against the Wizards the other night, has been really bad to the point where he was out of Billy Donovan's rotation prior to Larry Markin missing time here. So I don't understand it. I don't get it. I understand that I'm a big Wendell Carter supporter, and maybe this falls on deaf ears coming from me. But I just don't understand it. Daniel Gafford should remain on the bench. Wendell Carter is a starter on this team. I would not be changing it at all.
Coach Colucci, what say you?
Completely agree. Daniel Gafford is going to play 10 years in the NBA. And at the end of his 10-year career, you'll see him play with 6 different teams. He's one of those classic, he's an energy guy, which, by the way, always drives me crazy. Professionals are supposed to play with energy, all of them. But that's not the way it plays out now in today's NBA. Daniel Gafford had that one great half, maybe 2/3 of a game, where he scored, 14, 16 points. And I told Fred, I don't know if his hands didn't touch the rim on one of his shots. Think about it. They're all dunks, putbacks. He has a very limited offensive game. And I think what's going to happen is Wendell is going to continue to improve in that area. And I want to give you a little tidbit, Fred. I went back. If you happen to watch the Milwaukee game, Brook Lopez, I think, hit 3 or 4 deep threes early. And you thought, my God, why can't Wendell Carter do that? Well, I went back, and in his first 6 years in the league, you know how many threes Brook Lopez took? 0. Not a 3 in his first 6 years in the league. And if you look at why, the 3 is a tough shot from a kid coming out of college. I mean, that's a really deep shot. I think Wendell is going to get better offensively, and he's going to put this whole Daniel Gafford versus Wendell in the rearview mirror.
Agreed. Doug, what's your opinion on this topic?
My opinion is it's ridiculous that you asked the question. I mean, there's no movement for this. This was like people who were excited about one half. And right. That's it. I've seen nothing picking it up. And if you just go and even look at their stats now, it's ridiculous. Like, Carter's stats are actually good. You know what Carter is shooting from the field right now? 58%. You know what he's shooting from 3? 33%. So, like, all this talk about how awful he was, he's quietly actually shot pretty well the last 3 games in very low volume after, being very awful in preseason. He's up to 33% on the season. So even his 3 wasn't that bad. I mean, he's a way better rebounder. Do you really think Gafford's a good defender? Yeah, he's an energy guy, but I don't think his overall defense is very good. He gets a few highlight plays, but fundamentally isn't very strong. I mean, Carter is just better up and down in pretty much every area that there is.
Well, that's a correct question. But Doug, I have my ear to the Bulls' pulse, Twitterverse pulse, and I'm telling you, this is an issue. Maybe not my ear. Maybe it should be my hand to the pulse. But it has been an issue. They brought it up on the Bulls postgame show on NBC. Will Perdue commented on it. Kendall Gill commented on it.
Anyone commented outside of that Washington game? Anyone commented? Like, there's that one game where he had a great half, and everyone's like, "Oh man, Daniel Gafford." But that's it. I've not seen anything like that before or after.
I agree. Yeah. Well, there is still a loud, noisy contingent, I'd say, I'd estimate it's 20% of the Bulls fan base who would prefer. In fact, I want to put this as a poll: should Gafford start or should Wendell Carter start? And I'll bet you'll get about 1,000 responses, and it'll be 80-20 in favor of Wendell Carter Jr. The fact is, the correct answer is Wendell Carter Jr. should start.
Well, 80-20 is not a battle, right? Like 80-20 is everyone says.
I'm trying to come up with topics for this show, Doug. What do you think I'm doing? This is an absolute valid topic, and let me explain why Wendell Carter should start. In the last 4 games, he's shooting 71% from the field. He's averaging 15 points and 8 rebounds per game. He's shooting 50% from 3. He's playing fantastic. The last 3.
Fred, let me throw in, I don't think Daniel Gafford is playing as bad as Doug is making out to be. He's a 12 to 15-minute night guy. Come in, can give Wendell Carter a blow. He plays hard. He runs up and down. I mean, he's a good backup center who's going to play 12 minutes a game for the next 10 years in the NBA. He will be on 6 different teams, but he will play in the NBA because they need guys like that.
And I completely agree with that. I completely agree. I just said Carter is better in pretty much every phase. But Gafford, yeah, he's fine. He's fine as a backup center. Here's my Fred. Next show that I'm on, you got to come up with a topic that we don't all agree on. Right now, I think we're like 7 for 7 on topics everyone says the same thing about. So
well, I'm sure that's a good point.
Down the gauntlet to you to come up with an actual controversial topic. Let's see if you nail this last one.
Mark, I will tell you this: no matter what you guys say in the next one, I'm going 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
Okay, great.
Doesn't matter.
Good point. That's a good point. Hey, but Doug, part of the reason for the show is to educate the fan base. That's what we're here for. We're for the smartest minds. I know I'm one in the top 1% of Bulls fan base when it comes to intelligence, and we're here to educate the fan base. We're here to tell them what they should be thinking, why they're wrong for their opinion. And there's a large contingent out there that Gafford should be starting. It's ridiculous, and we're just pointing it out. And the fact is, if Gafford was starting, he wouldn't be performing as well. He wouldn't be. He's being put in position to succeed by this fantastic coach, Billy Donovan. And you know, people are like, "Well, Wendell's not hitting the 3." You think Gafford can hit the 3? Gafford's far less capable of hitting the 3 than Wendell Carter Jr. You want to get a good laugh? Let's watch Gafford throw up 23 pointers.
If you want to complain about Carter on the 3, if I told you before the season started he's going to shoot 33% from the 3-point line, would you be upset? That's what he's shooting right now today. With all of the complaints, that's what he's shooting right now today. It's 33% on the season.
I'd be ecstatic.
That's what it's going to be. You'd probably say, yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah, they're the last thing in. Yeah, what's that? Go ahead, Coach.
The last thing to say on this, Fred, is the 3 he took at Milwaukee. It should be discounted. My rule at the NBA level is if you hit it off glass from straight away, it can take the basket away from you.
That's fair. I agree with that too.
Well, Coach, I also got to say too, I'm so sick of people talking about how bad he was in the preseason. The preseason doesn't count. I'm so sick of this conversation. It's like factored in. He had a terrible preseason. Who gives a crap? Who's factoring in the preseason? I wasn't bragging to all my friends about Valentine's fantastic 2016 preseason.
I think
maybe I was
up today at a party.
All right. Let's move on to the next topic.
Issue number 3, grading Zach, Kobe, and Pat. Can Zach and Kobe play together? Few questions surrounding the Bulls are more important to answer. Let's provide some early season grades on 3 important players, Zach LaVine, Kobe White, and Patrick Williams.
I'm going to start out with you on this one, Coach Colucci. Zach LaVine, I want a grade between A through F for Zach LaVine. Let's start out with him.
I'm a tough grader. I still think he's a C+ to a B. A little inconsistent. He could lean towards the B+. Look, trying to find guys who can score 25 points a game is really hard in the NBA. Last year, there were 12 of them, and he's one of them. And the other thing is I do get the sense he's trying to make a commitment on the defensive end. He'll never be a good defensive player. All he needs to be is an adequate one. But here's my biggest concern about Zach LaVine. I gave him a B. My concern is he's played with 4 or 5 losing teams in the last 4 or 5 years. Minnesota to here. Is he all of a sudden going to get to that mindset, we can't win because we have never won in the past? Winning is a mindset, so is losing. But I'll give Zach a B just because I love the fact that when he took the ball to the basket and threw it down, I had to jump out of my seat, point at it, and said, I used to be able to do that when I was young.
Okay. Thanks, Coach. Let's go over to Doug. I'd like to get your opinion on Zach LaVine. What do you give him? So what's your grade? Hold on 1 second. Coach, what's your grade?
I give him a B.
B?
B as a boy, yep.
Doug?
What is the scale here? I mean, is this like relative to our expectations? Is this relative to the NBA as a whole? I think that's an important thing to figure out.
No. This is relative to our expectations of Zach LaVine. We've seen enough of him. Where has he performed relative to where we've seen him before? Because I think he's been a disappointment.
So an A for Kobe White is maybe less than a B for Zach LaVine, is what you're saying in this conversation. Just to be clear, I'm not saying Kobe's an A and Zach's a B, but
Zach's our best player. I expect him to perform better than he has.
Yeah. Okay. So if you expect Zach, I'd say he's about a C. He's right where he was last year to me. His scoring is maybe a little bit down. His defensive effort is a little better. The thing I think about Zach LaVine is eventually he's going to play somewhere else. I don't think he's going to be here more than after his current contract is gone. And when he does, one of my friends on the Real GM forum, Coldfish, said this. He said, Zach LaVine is the type of guy who his worst mistakes are when he goes into hero ball mode. And if he's on a good team, he's not going to have to do that. Like, he actually feels pressure because of who else is on this team to do that. And when you see him go to some other team with some other good players and he doesn't have to do these like really bad things anymore, he'll probably stop. And then you'll be like, why didn't we have that Zach LaVine? And we're not going to have that Zach LaVine here. So I thought that was a really good way to look at Zach, whom I like a lot, but he's not capable of the role he has to play here based on our other players. And I don't think we're going to get a good enough player in time next to him. But this year, he may be C+. I mean, his defensive effort was a little bit better than I expected. But he's basically the same guy as last year. So to me, versus expectations, a little better than expected, maybe about the same. But I mean, overall, clearly the Bulls' best player still in the NBA. I think he's a top 50 talent. So, I have a hard time, like maybe someone else is going to get a higher grade from me, but they're not a better player than Zach.
Very, very good.
One of the things, Zach, to mention about Zach, I think he's also trying to facilitate more. I see him as he breaks down defenses. He's looking to kick out for threes. He didn't do that last year. He seems like he's trying to involve his teammates more. He's trying to play defense. You got to give him credit for that. I think he's a top 25 talent, to be honest. I'll go up one more grade from Doug.
Nice.
Mark, what about you? What do you think of Zach? What are you going to give Zach?
Look, I feel similarly to Doug in the sense that Zach is miscast in role. He's obviously trying to be the number one option in Chicago when in reality he's probably a number two or number three option on a good team. And just the perception of him will dramatically change once he's hopefully on a good team, whenever that may or may not be. As to a grade, I'm not 100% sure. I want to say C+, but if I look at his numbers, shooting just over 40% from the field, less than 30% from three, averaging more turnovers than assists. So at this point, I'd probably go C-, just based on my expectations of LaVine. He's not playing as well as he was last season. I think he's still a few steps behind at the moment. He's probably got a lot of pressure on him to the point we just sort of suggested. He's sort of miscast as that number one option, and the Bulls as well have been missing rotation players through this COVID protocol, which has sort of forced more on LaVine's shoulders. So he's had to do more. He's probably had more pressure on him because Kobe White hasn't necessarily been that great himself. So that a lot of playmaking responsibilities have fallen back on Zach. And through 6 games at least, I think he hasn't been at the level that I would have hoped. He has shown flashes in certain games where he's looked quite good. In other games, he's looked quite bad, like yesterday against the Bucks. His playmaking was quite bad. He had so many turnovers, really. So I'll probably say C- at this point.
Yeah, that's the correct answer, C-. He's been slightly less disappointing than what I expected. First of all, defensively, he's shown some really nice signs. One-on-one defense, he had a great memorable play against Westbrook. But, overall, like yesterday, just to start the game, he gives up a three his problems are mentally on the defensive end. Gives up a 3 to start the game to DiVincenzo, who's shooting out of his mind so far this season. You can't allow him to get an open 3. And that just starts out the game off in a horrible fashion. His turnovers are way too high this year. I think he's averaging over 4 turnovers. He had a couple games where he was at 7. I think against Golden State. He's had some nice moments, but overall, my biggest concern is 29% from 3. Zach is one of our best 3-point shooters. That's got to come up. I expect it to come up, but that's where he's really disappointed me because overall, I think the team, a lot of guys have played better than expectations. And if Zach was playing at a higher level, this team would be 4-2 potentially. Let's move on. The next guy I'd like to grade is Kobe White. Let's start out with Doug on this one, and we'll go counterclockwise. Doug, what about Kobe White? What would you give Kobe?
I like an F-. I don't know. It's something pretty close to that. And 4-2, which of those games that we were down by like 40 points in, do you think we were going to win if Zach was shot 40
Right.
points? Because there's like 3 games that we weren't even remotely close. Like we lost by so much through 3 quarters that, you could throw Michael Jordan on the team and we weren't going to win. So
let me step in here and I'll tell you, the Indiana game really bothered me because that game we were within striking distance at halftime. We were up 40-34 at one point. We start out the second half with the starters, and that was Zach at his worst. Hero ball, just running into guys, hoping to get a call.
Yeah, definitely was worth 30 points. I mean, for sure, what Zach did. We were minus 30 in that quarter. Anyway, moving on because you're just wrong. I mean, Kobe White, like, what's his PER in the season now? Like 6 or 5 or -3? I think it's actually 8 point something. The guy is he doesn't look naturally fit as a point guard. He's not shooting the ball well. He can't finish it all inside. Defensively, he's getting just destroyed by everyone. He's just had a rough start to everything. And I'm fine just letting him try to get the wheels on the bus at point guard. Like the coach said, give him 18 games. We've got to give him some time to work through this. He's gotten progressively better, I think, as time has gone on. He's had his moments. He looked okay. But overall, after what was a really nice preseason for Kobe White where he shot lights out, I mean, he just came and he's stinking up the joint, to start the season.
Mark, do you agree?
I definitely agree. I feel bad for Kobe in a sense because he just doesn't have a lot of playmaking support, so to speak. And in that way, I guess he's fortunate that he doesn't necessarily have a lot of competition to come for his role at this point. And even last season, I guess there wasn't a lot of quality point guard options available to the Bulls. So in that sense, he's a benefactor. But at the same time, I do feel for Kobe because he's clearly not a point guard in the sense of he's not a lead creating option. I think that's pretty clear. That was clear to me the moment I saw him. But I'm okay with the Bulls trying this, and maybe they find something, a diamond in the rough. Maybe he develops into that playmaker. I think it's a very, very low chance that actually happens. But generally, if you have as many points as field goal attempts, that's a bad sign. So Kobe's averaging 14.5 points per game this season, which looks on the surface pretty good. But when you're taking just under 14 shots a game to get that 14.5 points per game, that's generally not good. So, 35% from the field, shooting exactly the same from 3, turnovers, not really playing or sort of leading the offense or orchestrating the offense. And as you mentioned, Fred, or was it Doug, whoever it was, the defensively just can't stay connected to his assignment at all. He's just absolutely dying on screens. The kid really needs to bulk up because he just can't get battle through screens at all. And we saw it with Stephen Curry. We've seen it with some of the other guards that we've played thus far. That a lot of coming back to what we were talking about before about Wendell Carter and people started taking aim at his defense. Our point of attack defense is so bad that whoever Kobe's guarding, whoever Zach's guarding, these guards are having such a free will and free reign to enter into the paint at just any point they want. So I'm probably more concerned with his defense at this point, to be honest with you. I know he's a bit of a streak offensive play. I'm expecting his offense to come through at some point from a pure scoring standpoint. But, he hasn't been very good. It's not working at this point. But at the same time, the Bulls don't really have any other point guard options to supplant Kobe at this point.
So, Mark, you give him a what, D?
I will be a little kinder than Doug. I think Doug threw out the F-. I'll go D- if I can't do an E.
Okay, and Coach, before we get into your grade, I do want you to comment a little bit on the point guard position, which as a coach,
yes,
someone I've dealt with, it's the most difficult position on a basketball court. You look at guys like Mike Conley, who took several years to really develop as a point guard. It's not something that happens overnight. Very rarely it does, but I think it's a very difficult position. So I've been a little bit happier with his ability at the point guard position. I'm surprised. What's your take on first comment?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, my concern is his handle is really loose. He's constantly seems to be fumbling the ball when he gets pressure put on him and kicking it away. Like Doug and Mark said, this has not been a good start for Kobe. My concern is clearly he's an off guard. And now you have Zach LaVine. So they're going to have to make a decision. 1, we need to get someone who can run the point for us. And 2, who do we keep, Zach or Kobe? They're going to have to make that decision. Donovan has thrown him into the point guard position out of necessity. There really is nobody else. You can't play Sato for 35 minutes a night. But it's interesting when they do play Sato, how they seem much more organized on the offensive end. They just get into their sets quicker. They seem to get guys in the right position. I mean, how often have any of us seen Kobe dribbling the ball up high with 7 seconds to go, and you can see they're all panicking? Like, what do we do now? How do we – so – like you guys, I had him down as a D, a C minus to a D. He has not done the job this year. Here's the thing about him. The kid hasn't complained about it at all. Now he's young, but he hasn't complained. He's tried his best to do what he's supposed to be doing. Let's wait 18 games. Donovan is supposed to work miracles with these guys. Let's see if Billy can work miracles with Kobe White. So I gave him a C minus. I'm going to be a little bit more generous than the other two guys because he's taking on a role that he's never done before.
Yeah, I'm absolutely against this. Let's start Sato movement. I think it's absolutely insane or ridiculous. I understand we might be a little bit better, but number one, Sato wasn't that good of a starting point guard. He's partly succeeding because he's in a role where he flourishes, which is off the bench. Part of the reason of this season is to figure out what's the goal. Can Zach and can Kobe play as a starting backcourt? And I was pleasantly surprised with his 10-assist effort against Washington. That was one of the best times I've seen Kobe White play in his career. I thought he was absolutely fantastic facilitating for others. I've been pleasantly surprised with his ability to facilitate for others. Yeah, he's not shooting the ball well. That's an issue. And he's too many turnovers. I absolutely agree with all that. Having problems on the defensive end. But in the area where I wanted to see growth the most, which is he making the other guys on the court better? Is he setting them up? I think I've been surprised in a positive fashion in that effort so far. So I'm going to give him a C minus. Yes, a disappointment overall. But before we close it, I want to just make sure you all agree Kobe should continue to start. And this movement again in Bulls Twitter is asinine. Doug?
I'd be fine if they started Sato. I mean, I'm not pushing for it. I'd be okay if they keep Kobe in there too. But the argument for starting Sato isn't so bad. It's that you might trade Lowry, you might trade someone else at the deadline. Putting a better point guard with those guys might be in position to make them succeed more, might allow their growth to be more, might make their value more at the deadline. I think you have to figure out what you're going to do with Kobe eventually. But if you start Sato up until the deadline and then you develop Kobe after that, I'd be kind of okay with that too. Clearly, Sato is not the long-term mix here, and I think your point about him being better in the bench role is probably true. I'm either or. It wouldn't upset me if they pull him out of the lineup. It won't upset me if they keep him.
Mark?
Yeah, look, I'm fine either way. I'm happy if Kobe continues to start. What I would probably want to see is probably not him leading the team in minutes, which he currently is. He's averaging 33 minutes a game at this point. Now, some of that is circumstantial, given that Satoransky and Ryan Arcidiacono have been in the NBA's health and safety protocol. So I would imagine naturally that number would come down. So maybe rather than having him off the bench and starting Satoransky, maybe you would limit his minutes if he's not getting it together. Maybe that's something you'd do. Maybe you'd play Satoransky more minutes, not necessarily starting him. But like I said before, the Bulls don't necessarily have a lot of good options. It's not like they have a backup point guard, a young backup point guard who can come in and supplant him type thing. We're talking about Satoransky. We're talking about Arcidiacono, two veterans who aren't really part of the long-term future. So I'm fine with continuing to start him, but maybe just rein him in if he's not playing well and if he doesn't have it together.
Coach, did you want anything else to add?
Yeah, clearly Mark and Doug got into the liquor cabinet over New Year's. They haven't fully gotten rid of the alcohol in their systems. Look, he's a young kid. You got to play him 30 to 35 minutes, and you're going to have problems with him. You're going to have problems with Pat Williams. We're going to talk about him in a moment. I mean, they're young kids who are learning to play at the NBA level, and the way you do that is by playing 30 to 35 minutes a night. So I think they got to keep on this course. Sato will play 15 or 18 against their second team, which makes him a better player. That's how Billy Donovan's going to proceed. At least when Donovan and I talked the last time, that's how he said he was going to proceed. All
right. Now, Knights, let's keep the accusations of drunkenness to a minimum. Keep a good decor here.
An observation and an accusation, I think.
Okay. Let's go on to the final player, Patrick Williams, the rookie. What's your grade? I want to start out with Mark since he is the leader of the Pat Williams fan club. Let's start out with you, Mark, on this one. What grade would you give young Patrick Williams?
I would probably say a B, maybe somewhere in that range. Whether you want to say B plus, B minus, I'm not going to argue too much. But I just like what he's done. He hasn't necessarily wowed us from a box score standpoint, and he maybe had a tough time yesterday against Giannis, as most players do, and that was talk about throwing young players to the fire, like we were just talking about Kobe and getting Kobe just playing the point guard position. Whilst that's a tough position, I think having to guard Giannis and having to guard some of these bigger wings that we see in the NBA at the moment, I think that's just as tough. So from that standpoint, I think, Patrick Williams didn't have his best game yesterday, so maybe that doesn't reflect well on this answer right now. But the little things that he has done as a 19-year-old who hasn't had training camp or 1 week of training camp, hasn't had summer league, hasn't played really in a competitive basketball for 9 to 10 months, coming in as one of the youngest players in this draft, and just stepping into a starting role, which I wasn't expecting him to start really at this point, and not only starting at small forward, getting minutes at power forward, showing his versatility. But it's the little things he's doing from an offensive standpoint in terms of understanding where to be, cutting off the ball. He's doing some things with off the bounce that I wasn't expecting right at this point, maybe later in his rookie season. He's doing things at an expeded rate that I just wasn't expecting. And then on defense, his held defense, I think, for a rookie has just been exceptional. So from a pure box score standpoint, you may look at the numbers and it doesn't necessarily wow you from that point of view. But it's probably more the things that he's doing off ball that maybe don't appear in the box score that is really encouraging for someone so young. So I'll give him a B at this point.
Doug.
I feel like we're out of order, but sure.
I'm switching around.
I would probably generally agree with Mark. I didn't have super high expectations for Pat Williams this year. I don't think he's playing at any particularly special level. I've been impressed with his shooting. I mean, he's not shooting a lot of volume, but he's over 40% from three. We'll see if that continues. But he's kind of shown to me what looks like very high potential for a good floor. A couple questions we had about him is, can he play small forward, or is he going to be stuck at power forward? The answer to that seems probably yes. His shooting looks like so far like it's going to work out pretty well, and he can at least be a 3-and-D that can cover 3s and 4s in the league. I think that's pretty valuable. So his floor looks pretty good. I just want to say one thing I hate that Mark brought up that everyone brings up is saying, like, he's so young in this draft. Like, played in college. It's like everyone who is in this draft as I picked played 1 year in college, 4 years in high school. Like, what? He's like 3 months younger than like the typical guy. Like, it just doesn't matter. It's just irrelevant. Like, people bring that up like it makes this huge difference that he's 4 or 5 months younger than the next guy, if that, like, who also played 1 year in college. So his experience is the same. All these young guys have the same problem. I think he's had a good start. I don't hold that against him. I just hate it when people use that as an excuse. But he's fine. He looks good. He's got a good floor. He's better than I expected. Everything Mark said outside of that is accurate. I guess that's accurate. I just don't think it's meaningful.
Amen. Coach, Pat Will. Well, hold on. Really quick before we go to you, I want to get your grade, Mark, for Pat Will.
My grade, I'll give a B.
Doug?
I'll also go with a B.
Coach?
He's incomplete. 5 games into it, but I will tell you this. He's rapidly becoming my favorite Bull. I love his demeanor. He clearly knows what he's doing on the floor. He doesn't force offensively. He doesn't force shots. He can beat guys off the dribble. He's shown he can do that. And here's the one thing that has really impressed me. The hardest thing for young players to grasp on the defensive end in the NBA is not help defense, but helping the helper. That's one where they always kind of fall short because it's a hard thing to grasp. And he intuitively seems to understand that. And the last thing I will tell you, he got beat up by Giannis pretty good. Everybody does. But his response after the game is, these are the guys I want to guard. I love that mentality. I want to give him, I like the idea of a B, but I think an incomplete. When we do this again, Fred, in 18 games, I'll be able to give you a better grade on Patrick Williams.
Yeah, he's definitely he surpassed expectations for me. I thought it was a massive mistake. I still do, that he's been put in the starting lineup when he clearly, to me, would have been better off in the reserve role where he excelled at Florida State. I thought it would have been better just to bring him off the bench, especially for a team that's so young. The average starters on this team are I think, younger than Wisconsin Badgers starting lineup, believe it or not. So I thought it would have been better to have a vet out there. One thing, though, that is of concern to me that the great one Doug Tonis brought up on our Bulls podcast together, the Big Red Bus, He's averaging 3 rebounds a game, which is currently 8th on the team. Denzel Valentine's ahead of him at 3.3 in far less minutes. He's actually tied Williams with Ryan A. and Felicio, who both are playing far less minutes. That's a big concern, and especially for someone who's going to be playing the power forward position, as I foresee him going at. Small forward, too. And I've started to notice and focuses on this a little bit. He really needs to attack the rim better on the defensive side of the ball, either boxing out or just hitting the rim instead of going back up court. I've noticed it quite a bit. And that lack of rebounding has something that's brought me some concern. Doug, you talked on this before. You want to expound on it?
I don't have much else to add other than you, in that he just doesn't seem like a high hustle score guy. Like when I watch him on the court, he is not very active on either end of the floor. He's not moving around a whole lot. So some people have said he's very efficient with his movement. He's helping when he should help. He's moving where he should go. But like once the ball goes up, he's not chasing the ball. He's not running to box someone out. He's not crashing the glass. He could be very passive at times, where I feel he could be much more aggressive. Again, I think as I countered on our show too, it's 5 games in. If he's just saying like at the beginning, I'm just going to do what I can do. I'm going to make the smart play. I'm not going to, chase the ball all crazy and then find myself out of position, like whatever. But it's something that I think a lot of times you see guys come in and they either have that like hustle, dive on the floor, do everything you can mentality, or they don't. And he doesn't seem to have that to me. Just watching him, he's not like a very high activity guy. Maybe a counterexample on the Bulls team would be Kobe White's a high activity guy. Like he's full speed all the time, offense, defense, whatever, whether he's good or bad. Like he always seems very high activity. Obviously not a comparable position, but like he's got that motor. And Williams doesn't seem to, some of the guys people compare upside like Butler or Kawhi, I don't think those are super high motor guys necessarily. I don't think motor is like a top 3 trait that you need to have necessarily. But it's something for the type of player people envision him being. It was something I expected to be a little bit more there than it is. But 5 games, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add on that before we wrap up?
The one thing about that is part of it is his demeanor. If you look at him, he doesn't have that Draymond Green, constantly, yelling, screaming. He's got a very placid demeanor, and some of that projects, that's the way he plays. He's not a high motor guy. Wendell Carter has that same kind of demeanor. It's the only thing. Once in a while, I like him to show a little anger, a little energy, a little life. And it looks like Patrick Williams has that same kind of approach. Again, incomplete. Doug, let's see him in 18 games. If he's still doing that, as balls go up, he stares at them rather than taking that one aggressive step to the basket to try to secure a rebound.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, it's something that you easily can address with a couple film sessions. I'm sure the Bulls are. So I'm not really worried about it yet, but that number has to go up significantly. For the amount of time that he's playing, he needs average more than 3 rebounds a game. End of story. Especially at the power forward position now that we have Otto out there.
I would only add one thing, if you let me interject. It's not the number of rebounds, it's really his impact on rebounding. Robin Lopez is my favorite example of a guy who didn't secure a lot of rebounds, but when he was on the floor, the team always rebounded better because he boxed guys out. He got in guys.
He always blocked out.
And Williams isn't doing that either. Now, if he became a low rebound guy, but he was getting in front of people and doing whatever else, that's fine. So it's not the numbers, it's the impact. And I think you can improve on that. Like I said, better than I expected so far. Not a huge complaint, but it is the one thing I'd like to see more.
Yep.
Yeah, and to that point, I haven't checked the numbers with Williams on versus Williams off, but the Bulls at this point are a top 10 rebounding team in terms of rebounding percentages. So whilst he can certainly improve from a rebounding standpoint, I don't know if he's necessarily if it's impacting the team to a negative at this point, given that the team is top 10 in rebounding percentage. So yeah, I think it's a wait and see, but obviously an area for him to improve.
Great point, Mark. And so the correct grade for Williams is B-. Now on to the next section. Last section of the show. Here we go. So as a coach, what has impressed you the most about Billy Donovan so far this season? This is our final segment. Again, thanks everyone for listening. Let's start out with Coach Colucci, someone with a lot of experience, 30-plus years as a coach. What's impressed you about Billy Donovan, especially compared to the meathead we had last year?
2 things, and I'm gonna address the meathead issue too, Freddie. But 2 things. One, demeanor. I mean, this isn't a guy who's going to be screaming at players. And over a long period of time, if you're a professional, that's the kind of approach that wears easily on you. That's the first thing. Second is, and we've all heard if he says it one more time, Stacey King, KYP, know your personnel. Thad Young, in the first half of the first game he played this year, looked more engaged in his team offensively than he did all of last year, because he realized, don't just camp out on the three-point line. Thad Young is great at recognizing mismatches, getting into the block, doing the whole mouse in the house thing that Stacey loves to yell out, but converts a high amount of baskets because he knows how to play the low post game. I think those are the two things, his demeanor, and the second part is that he knows his players and he tries to build to their strengths. One last thing. We talked a lot, Freddie, about Jim Boylan and his blitz defense last year with Wendell Carter, Daniel Gafford. Those guys were always in trouble. Maybe he was forced to play those defenses because his guards were so terrible at getting around screens that he needed to bring his big guys out big or out to the three-point line to try to discourage drivers from getting to the basket. I'm not defending Jim Boylan, just pointing out maybe that's one of the reasons he had that mucked up defense last year. So I love Donovan. He's a Long Island guy. Grew up about 10 minutes from my wife, Marianne. So let's hope Billy D brings a championship.
All right. Mark.
Yeah, definitely agree with Mike in the sense from a demeanor. Like that's the first and most obvious thing that you can see with any coach, just how they handle themselves, how they talk in the media, how they I think one of the main things that I took away from yesterday is his post-game press conference. Like, you can read between the lines what Billy actually thinks, but he's not necessarily going to give a very direct and poor answer, let's say. So, as an example, he was asked about Kobe White's game or Kobe White's performance thus far, and he the way he sort of described it, I think he used the words learning experience or something to that effect. But whilst he maybe said that, you understood what he was actually trying to say. So the way he sort of goes out in the media and addresses the question, he doesn't attack his players through the media, from what we're seeing from this standpoint at least. He's very direct in that point of view. He's playing for his players, I guess, to the point the coach was sort of making there. So I like his demeanor off the floor, in the media, the way he's handled it, on the court, the way he's sort of handling himself. He's picked up too technical somehow, and I have no idea how that's the case because I haven't seen him lose his mind on the sidelines at all. But I just like his demeanor and just his professionalism. But the other thing that I've really liked, and maybe the easiest thing from our standpoint to view with coaches, is rotations. I like the way he's been mixing it up and throwing it around. I very much like the fact that he's really exploring the Larry Markkinen at center solution. It'll be interesting to see if it can sort of continue. That's ultimately up to Larry as to how successful he can be in that role. But the fact that he's sort of playing Larry, a guy who's probably not a center, but maybe sort of his value or his best, his utility is at center. The fact that he's sort of surrounding Larry with the big wings, the veterans, Otto Porter, Garrett Temple, Satoransky, that makes gives him Larry the best chance to be successful. So from that standpoint, he's been throwing his rotations around. I think he's blending in the veterans with the younger guys at a decent rate at this point. I'd probably like to see that continue to increase, as you sort of alluded to. Fred, the starting unit, the starting lineup rather, is super young, and we have all those veterans coming off the bench. So I think how Billy manages that and sort of massages that rotation will be interesting. But from what I've seen over 6 regular season games and 4 preseason games, I like the way he sort of handled the rotations and what he's been doing from that point of view.
Great. Doug?
I like the way you led this question. Like, everyone else was kind of like, what do you grade this guy? But with Billy Donovan, you're like, tell me all the things you love about him, assuming that I love Billy Donovan already. And so I think the answer to the things you like about Donovan, I think, have been given already. Maybe I'd add just a slightly different take, is that the ball movement has been pretty impressive. You don't have nearly as much standing around as you did last year on offense, and just guys being in the right position and doing things we want to see them, experimenting with things like Wendell Carter shooting threes, which we kind of want to see how he would operate in there. Having Thad Young being back in the post and not shooting threes, having Lowry not just standing around. So lots of ways we're using the players differently and have more ball movement, experimenting with Kobe White as a starting point guard to find out if that's going to be successful, and Lowry at center, all those things that we kind of brought up. So I agree with all of that. The one thing I'm going to say, just to throw out a little bit of controversy on the show, is, man, I hate this defense. I just hate it. It's just like this drop defense. Like, part of this is like the guards aren't fighting through screens real hard, and the point of attack is bad. But part of that is just the design of this defense where you always chase around the screen. It's really hard to chase around the screen and stay in front of your man. So your point guard is almost always going to be chasing the play, and that it's like most of the time if a good screen is set. And then when you drop down, you're just counting on your center to be good enough to deter these guys from getting shots at the rim. And maybe Carter will improve at that. But I think it is the thing where, like Boylan said, man, we need to play this gimmicky defense to do anything. We don't have good defensive players. This is what actually can work. And so I'm not a fan of the drop defense that he's put in, but I'll give it time to watch. Overall, I'm impressed with Donovan. I think he's got great rapport with his players. I think the players will like him. He kind of threw the whole team under the bus after the second game with his quote about you can build the guys a raft, but they have to swim to it. And I just thought to myself, if Jim Boylan said this, everyone would be pissed off and hate him. But so like some guys can kind of give you advice and kind of say you need to do some of this work, and people take it the way it's meant and take it in a positive way. And I think Donovan has got that type of rapport, at least right now, where he's able to do that. And I think he's actually going to be able to maintain that even through difficult times. Whereas clearly Jim Boylan's message was lost. Like no one wanted to hear this guy or listen to him. People were rolling their eyes at him. And I think Donovan has everyone's respect. So overall, obviously, it's a big upgrade. There's no doubt about that. The offensive side of the ball, I think, looks a million times better, regardless of the results. The way we're playing, the shots we're getting, the way it looks better. The defensive side of the ball, I'm not quite as excited about, but hopefully as these guys get more practices, again, no training camp for them to learn this new scheme. Hopefully as these guys get more practices, we see that I'm actually a moron and this scheme will work really well and the guys will play it better.
Yeah, Doug makes a really good point. I got to step in on. I am a little frustrated that the Bulls don't switch more. I think they have the personnel to do that. There's enough guys on this team that could switch more. And you going over screens against Milwaukee when Giannis has the ball is just stupid. You should be going under every screen when Giannis has the ball. You're just setting yourself up from issues by the way they played that defense yesterday. So I understand they got some great three-point shooters. Obviously, you got to decide who that guy is. But you should be switching more. I don't understand why they haven't done that. So that's a good point. But overall, it's all you can look at Thad Young. Thad Young, the 3 seasons before he joined Chicago, here were his three-point attempts: 118, 181, 146. That's all with 70-plus games, 80-plus games in 2 of those 3 years. He plays 64 games for the Bulls last year. He takes 222 three-point attempts. That's just a perfect example of a guy who does not know how to utilize his talent to make his talent adapt to the system instead of adapting the system to the talent. I saw Thad Young more in the post in that first game, which was a fantastic game from him, than I did in probably the entire year last year with Jim Boylan. So, amen. Great job, Billy. I knew Thad was going to have a fantastic year because he's being utilized correctly by a much better coach. But, Doug, you do make a good point on the defense. I'm not a big fan of it either.
Can I say that I completely disagree with you both on defense?
No, can't.
Go ahead. Make your point. Go ahead. Let's hear it.
Well, I'm just thinking about this current roster and my issues with the guard defense in particular. And if you're wanting to maybe apply different defensive coverage, whether it's switching, whether it's blitzing, whether it's showing, whatever the defensive coverage is, I'm assuming those defensive coverages are going to be a lot more aggressive than what the current drop coverage is. Meaning those sorts of defensive schemes are going to require a lot more IQ, a lot more rotations, a lot more communication, to the point where I would be very fearful of having Zach LaVine and Kobe White switching onto some bigger wings or even having to communicate that. I would have no confidence in their ability to do that. I don't have much of their ability to sort of stick with their man at this point or even fight over screens, but I'd probably be more concerned with the Bulls having to call out switches, to call out rotations, to call out, I'm on this player, you have to pick up this player type thing. We've seen it already, the number of times where guys just haven't picked up their right man in transition or in half court in a very basic drop coverage man defense. So when you're playing something more aggressive like a switching defense or, a blitzing scheme like Boylan was doing last season, you can do that maybe when you have Chris Dunn or Shaq Harrison as your point of attack defender with Wendell Carter sort of backing those guys up. But the minute you have lesser defenders on the perimeter and you're asking to switch and do all these sorts of things, I think it's fraught with more danger, I suppose. So I think he's picked a defensive coverage that's the lesser of all those evils. So I disagree.
Mark, let me just jump in there. Great point when we're talking about Zach LaVine and Kobe White. But I'm talking about the second unit when you have Wendell Carter Jr., Sato, Temple, Thad, and Otto. all four of those 5 guys, all those guys can switch. So they can all switch. That should be a switching unit. And not only that, that helps confuse the offense. When you're switching like that, you're going from the first unit that's doing the drop coverage to a unit that's switching on everything. I just named 5 guys that can play a switching defense. That's what they should do.
Yeah, but at the same time, like having the starters play one defensive coverage and then having the bench guys play another defensive coverage when you've had no training camp. Teams generally just have their base defensive coverage.
These are vets I'm talking about.
I understand that, but at the same time, like you're blending these lineups, you're mixing up these lineups. You've had no training camp. I think it's a tall order to ask any coach to have one base defensive coverage for his starters, one base defensive coverage for his second unit, them being virtually polar opposites, and then trying to blend that all together. I think that's just going to confuse players. So I just don't know how realistic it is.
I got to say one thing.
Mark, I think the thing to do, though, we're 5 games into it with a very limited preseason. You're absolutely right. He's got to get an offense in. He's got this basic defense that I think all of us are saying needs help. Let's talk again 36 games into the season when he's got some more time under his belt, meaning Billy Donovan, the coach, because he's a good coach. He's proved it in Oklahoma City in the tough Western Division. He's had winners. Let's see what it looks like 36 games from now. I really think you're going to see some changes. Maurice Cheeks is a great assistant coach. I've always liked him. I think a great defensive player, too. I actually got to see Maurice Cheeks. I might be dating myself. So I really believe that you'll see some changes on the defensive end 36 games into this process. So
fair point, Mike. Coach Doug, let's finish off with this, and then we'll call it a show.
The only thing I'm going to say so far that makes me a little bit concerned, and I think Billy Donovan is an amazing teacher. I'm not sure if he's an amazing head coach or not. I mean, his Oklahoma City team kind of got bounced in the first round, and the only year they really exceeded expectations was last year with Chris Paul. Maybe you see what Russell Westbrook has done since, and maybe those expectations were a little too high earlier. But I'm not entirely sold on Donovan. I think he's a huge upgrade to Boylan, but like maybe any of us in this room would be a huge upgrade to Boylan. So who knows? But he's an upgrade. The thing I just want to wonder is, so far, every team we've played that was not fielding what you would view as a bottom 5 roster against us, like just absolutely mopped up the floor with us, like annihilated us. Like we weren't even in the game. Like it was like a laugher where if you just sat through 4 quarters, you deserve some type of endurance award. And so like at some point, and all the things about not having time and all this other stuff, at some point, like the Bulls have to show and be competitive against the team that's not worse than the league. And if we're like 10, 15 games on this road trip and I have to sit through another 10, 15, like 30-point annihilations in the third quarter, Billy Donovan's not going to be immune to my anger either. That's all.
And on that note, I call an end to this episode of the Knights of the Roundball Table. I thank you, Coach Mike Colucci, Mark K. from Australia. Always great to see you, brother. And the podfather, the great one, Doug Tonis. This was a very tense, sometimes angry episode, but I enjoyed it, and I thought it was a little bit more hopefully entertaining for you. Please, listeners, please like us, subscribe to Shy City Sports. I don't know what it would be called. YouTube stream? I don't know what it would be. Something like that. Mark K., what would it be?
Edit that in there.
I guess their YouTube page, their Twitter handle,
Exactly.
their other socials, all those sorts of things, Frederick.
Thank you for stepping in there and with the assist. And also, our producer, Steve Johnson, just another great job. Another successful episode. I think we've hopefully changed the minds of millions of Bulls fans. Thank you. Good night, and we'll see you next week.